everybody, I am really excited to do my first ever Best of Fantasy video. I was sort of dragging my feet on making this video, thinking I had to finish a couple series or I wanted to get this done to see if this is my top 10. Eventually I thought, that's always going to be the case. There's always going to be more great books and series to read. But I just love talking about my favorite. I've sort of mentioned some of my favorites before, and so I thought, let's make a clear video, Andy's top 10 fantasy works of all time. And as with any of these lists, this is obviously a mixture of some critical eye as far as things that I think are technically really good and need to be recognized and appreciated and loved. And then of course there's always a personal side of things, of when I experience these things, what's involved in them. I can't divorce my experience of these works from the works themselves. I think that's impossible. I'm a good postmodernist. It's not intended to be an objective work of video, whatever that means. But without further ado, let's get to the video. Before I get to my number 10 favorite fantasy series of all time, I wanted to do some honorable mention, or not really honorable mention, but more like maybe category. And these are series that I am in the middle of currently, and I think have potential, depending on where they go and how the story progresses, to be some of my favorites of all time. And that would include The Expanse series, which I've only read 2 of, but already really enjoyed and having a fun time with. The Dresden Files, which is surprising to me, because the first couple were okay, but I read Summer Night recently and just had a blast, and it really exploded in the world building and perspective and story beats, and so I'm excited to get going on there, and it could be some of my top depending on how it progresses. The Witcher series will definitely be on here when I get through them. I've only read The Last Wish. You can check out my review. I loved it. I thought there were some really interesting themes. I loved the character of Geralt. I loved the moral questions that the series deals with, but I've only read 1 book, and I felt I had to at least read 2 or 3 of the books before I could put it in my top 10, but I'm pretty sure The Witcher is going to be there. Another one is Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles. I love Name of the Wind. I think it's beautiful. Patrick Rothfuss really has poetic writing, and I really enjoy it. The second one, Wise Man's Fears, was not quite as good. It had some weaknesses, I thought, but with a good 3rd book, or potentially a good 3rd and 4th book, I'm not one of those picky fans, that series could definitely jump up in my estimation in my top, even though it's not there right now. Without further ado, let's get to the actual ranking. We're going to start off this list with a surprise, at least what I think most people will think is a surprise. 10 is going to be The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. Now, the main criticism leveled at this book and these series of books is actually the reason I have it in my top 10, and that is that it borrows a lot from a lot of the great fantasy of the past. It's reminiscent a lot of things like Star Wars as far as the story structure, Lord of the Rings in some of the races, R.A. Salvador and some Forgotten Realms stuff, as well as Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders. So there's definitely huge echoes of fantasy works, but I actually really enjoy it, especially for a YA series and an entrance into the genre. I think Paolini's work is great. I highly recommend it to new readers in the genre, especially if you're younger, because it's just fun. It's great, and you can look at it in 2 ways. It's stealing and borrowing from a lot of stuff, and that's sort of the negative way of viewing at it. But in my viewpoint, it's sort of an homage and sort of preparing young readers for that world of fantasy and some of these elements that are shared in common over a lot of different series. As I said, I also can't divorce the fact that Eragon is one of my key inputs and entrances into the genre that I now love, and it taught me to love those things and elves and learning about cultures, because I also don't think, as much as the first one, Eragon is a fairly classic tale, the 2nd and 3rd books in this cycle get very deep into societal world building and getting to know languages, customs, and things that the elves and dwarves and all these things do differently. And I thought it had some real depth. And it ended pretty well as well. I thought the ending was somewhat clever. I highly recommend it. I know that it's not incredibly popular to love those books anymore, but I do. Number 9, the first appearance of one of my favorite authors, my girl, Robin Hobb. This is the Farseer trilogy. Now, I am not going to deal with her whole realm of the Elderlings as one series. I honestly think, at least as far as I've read so far, that is not a great way to deal with the series because there's so many different flavors and even genres within that I think they should be treated separately. So that's how I'm going to treat it in my top 10s. Maybe I'll change as soon as I read all of the Realm of the Elderlings, but for now, I'm going to divorce the 2 series I've read there. So this Farseer trilogy is going to be number 9. If you're not familiar with this, it's about a boy, Fitz Chivalry is his name, and he is the bastard son of a prince, and he sort of accidentally gets caught into this world of political intrigue in this kingdom called the Six Duchies. Hobb is just such a good storyteller, such a good character developer. Like, you just get to know Fitz, get involved with him, and as much as that sounds like a cliche sort of chosen one-ish, medieval European fantasy story, it really isn't, because Hobb treats her characters as true people, as sentient beings, and so they make dumb decisions, they make bad decisions, horrible things happen to them, and things don't go well. If a young, untrained boy is thrust into the machinations of a kingdom and others with power, they're not gonna do well. And I think this book does a lot of really interesting things with power and how it affects people and how bad people can gain power. It is also some of the most emotional reading I've done. And normally when people say emotion, they mean like sad. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean like the frustration I felt, but also the elation and struggle, like all of that happens to the characters you feel as a reader. And I think that is just artistry. Robin Hobb is an amazing writer, and she'll definitely show up again on this list. I'm sure many of you can guess what that is going to be. Let's move on to number 8. Some people might say this is a sci-fi, but if anything, I'm going to say it is a sci-fi fantasy and kind of leans towards the fantasy side of that equation, and that is Dune. I think Dune is a fantastic work. It is very unique and in some ways not accessible to people who have only read modern fantasy, but if you really struggle and wrestle with it, you are rewarded with not only a great story, but really interesting thought, and you're challenged as a reader. I'm also going to couple this with the second book in this very long series, Dune Messiah. I think everyone should read those 2 books. Dune Messiah is super short. It might be less than 100 pages depending on the edition you have, but those 2 works I think do such interesting things with the idea of power, political power, how it can be used, the oppression of indigenous peoples and their cultures, and a misunderstanding of what it means to be an advanced culture. A lot of really, really great things, and religious themes about our relationship with salvation in a larger context. There's just so much interesting stuff in these books. It is a unique style. Frank Herbert is truly unique, is the word that keeps coming to mind. I know I've said it a couple of times, but highly recommend Dune. If you haven't read it yet, this is a great year to do it. Coming up here in 2021, because the movie by one of my favorite directors, Denis Villeneuve, is coming out. So check that out. Very excited about that movie, but also you should read the book first to kind of go in and have your own picture of that experience. 7 is going to be The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and then the last couple books by Brandon Sanderson. This is, again, one of those series, and in fact, I would say the series that taught me that fantasy had a larger genre. I read Lord of the Rings very early on, and I loved it, and I read like Ender's Game and a couple other sort of sci-fi, Star Wars-like books, and I learned that I kind of like that imagination and fantasy feel. But I honestly did not know that there were adult books like that and deeper exploring of these themes and worlds. And my uncle actually was the one who handed me Eye of the World, and Robert Jordan opened this up for me. The first 3 books are really a fantastic kind of homage, but also slight twist on sort of Lord of the Rings-esque classic fantasy. And so in that sense, they're done very, very well. And then at about the fourth one, which I think is called The Shadow Rising, it's a completely different and new spin on that same theme, where the world is opened up massively and you learn about all of these cultures. And sort of the central theme is how hard it would be if there was actually an end of the world to try to unite the world, and the fighting of these various cultures and peoples and kingdoms, and how that could be wrangled, or if it could be wrangled. And throw into that a really unique take on magic with channeling and a bunch of fun, unique elements and great characters. I love Wheel of Time. I think it's fantastic. And it is one of those long series that really sticks the landing. And also a series that is having an adaptation coming up with the new Amazon TV series that, for all intents and purposes, looks pretty good. This is a great year to start reading Wheel of Time. A lot of my friends are doing read-throughs, particularly my friend Jade at Bedtime Bookworm. Check her out as she is doing a Wheel of Time readathon all this year. It's a great series. Pick it up. Please read it. Number 6. This one is so hard to categorize for me because, well, first I'll tell you what it is. It's His Dark Materials, the Philip Pullman trilogy. Starts off with The Golden Compass, and then moves on to The Subtle Knife, and then finishes with The Amber Spyglass. There's a great trilogy that I think is miscategorized as YA by a lot of people. I think this is a very adult story. If you aren't aware, it's about a young girl named Lyra, and in this world, their soul sort of manifests as an animal companion. When people are children, their animal companion can change, and then at some point in their life, it becomes firm, and so adults have, they call them demons, or their physical manifestations of their souls are stationary, just one type of animal. And it has a lot of really fascinating aspects to it, especially in its critique of religion and how religion has been used by powerful people for bad ends, and the actual idea, particularly of Christianity in a Roman Catholic context or a Church of England context, can be used in an abusive way. But also strong themes about sexuality and what that has to do with freedom and our expression as people. It's really heavy philosophical stuff. And not only that, but it's told in a beautiful way in this really unique, odd world. I love His Dark Materials. The reason I said I struggled with where it was going to be is because the first book, Golden Compass, is, I think, a perfect book. It's so fun and yet so deep and thoughtful, and he weaves so many interesting themes together that are just fascinating. Great. Like, that would be up there as some of my favorite fantasy of all time. The Subtle Knife, the second one, is good. Not quite to those heights, but a very, very good book. And then the third one, I think, has, again, some interesting ideas that sort of don't hold the same kind of weight and seems to sort of bend under the weight of all that Philip Pullman is trying to do, and it drags a little bit and doesn't quite stick the landing. So that's why, even though the first one is so a favorite, it's here in the middle of the list at 6, just outside of the top 5. But nonetheless, I think this is a series that is severely underread. It had a huge comeback when those movies were made with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig back in the early 2000s, and everyone was trying to get in on like the Harry Potter thing. But since then, I feel like there's not a lot talked about it. But it is a great series, and if you haven't read it, please read it. Fantastic. All right, now we are to the top 5 fantasy series of all time. Number 5, very important book for me getting into fantasy, a world I love and go back to all of the time, characters I love that feel like best friends and even like close family members. That is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Now, I am going to have to divorce the author from the work in this case because of some of the things that Rowling has said the past year has been hurtful to the transgender community. I want to acknowledge that here at the start, but go on to talk about the series itself. I love Harry Potter. I love the world and Hogwarts. Like I said, I can't divorce this from my experience of growing up with these books, reading them multiple times, waiting in line to get the newest one as they hit shelves. I literally went over to my friend's house. We both bought books, and instead of hanging out, we just read all day and then just talked about the chapters when we were done with them. Like, there's so much about this that is part of who I am as a person. I can't not love them. To this day, I try to read them every couple of years, and they just cause so much joy. I love them so much. Harry Potter has to be on this list, number 5. Let's move to number 4, and I will say these top 4 are pretty tough to rank for me. They're all just like right there next to each other. I put them in this order for now. I feel pretty good about number 1, but after that, depending on the day, these could be anywhere. But in this particular list, on this particular day, number 4 is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. I know it's become popular and fun to sort of poke fun at the guy because he hasn't finished it and he's enjoying his fame and success, but I just don't begrudge authors like that. I don't know why, but I don't know. Both he and Patrick Rothfuss are people who, you know, a lot of fans get upset about. I'm just happy that they did what they did. I love the Song of Ice and Fire books. All of them. In fact, I think the latter books are some of my favorites. I like the expanding story, the sort of odd, small doses of magic that we get that we don't quite understand, the unlocking of the past that we get through some viewpoints. I just really love these books, and the world of Westeros I think is fantastic. The unexpected twists and turns and the depth of character and character perspective, what Martin did with like turning enemies into protagonists and friends into enemies, and just so complicated in the storytelling element, I think is fantastic. I have faith that he'll finish the work, but even if he doesn't, this is just a great series of books that I love. Yes, I was disappointed with the TV show, but the books are great. I love his style. I love his bravery in storytelling. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. Number 3, if you've been watching this channel, this comes as no shock to you at all. It is the Live Ship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is a perfect trilogy. All the books from Ship of Magic, the first one, Mad Ship, to Ship of Destiny are brilliant. Have your attention from beginning to end. Unbelievably beautiful prose from Robin Hobb. The world is incredibly unique. The story structure is also incredibly unique. Like, there's no predictability in this. Some of my favorite literary characters ever, and it really is a parable about especially women, but really everyone trying to find their own way through society and having to decide what tradition is good, what tradition is harmful, how to deal with trauma and cycles of trauma through different generations. It's like exactly what fantasy should do, dealing with deeper themes in a fantastical way. Robin Hobb has done something incredible. This especially is a trilogy that is so underrated. Again, I am gobsmacked. I've said this before, that this is not talked about all over the place as the best fantasy of all time. One of the best fantasy, and obviously I agree on that because it's my 3rd of all time. Number 2, the all-time great, the granddaddy of them all, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I first picked these up when I was in 5th grade. Don't know how much I retained from that reading, but I can tell you that it instilled a love of fantasy to me, and for that work in particular, that will always stay. I just love these books. I love what they represent. The storytelling, the depth of world, even down to the poems and the songs and the sort of classic way that it is told, chivalrous almost way that J.R.R. Tolkien writes. I love the way he writes scenery, talking about like simple things, like how he talks about green lawns in the midst of a meadow, and how a creek went through into a dike and opened up onto a crevasse, and just like he has this way of speaking that is just so beautiful and paints such an incredible mind picture to me as I read it. I just love these books. It's another one of these books, all of these except for obviously Live Ship Traders because I just read them this year, but all of these works I try to come back to often and relive them because they're so great. Lord of the Rings, I can't say enough about how much I love that series. Which leaves number 1, and I'm sure everyone is shocked to learn that it is indeed Malazan Book of the Fallen by none other than Steven Erikson. I just finished these this year for the first time and absolutely adore them. It is a postmodern take on the fantasy genre, incredible perspectives, an incredible large, huge world, and a fantastic tale revolving around the idea that compassion must be involved in our fight or there is no true victory. It is potentially life-changing, I think, and just an astounding work. Erikson's prose are some of the best, not some of the best, I think in my opinion the best in the genre and potentially anywhere. Thoughtful, touching, emotional, and yet in the midst of this like crazy shit world where anything could happen. Magic, Kachin Shamal that are basically like dinosaurs with swords. It's unbelievable what Erikson has done with this series, and I love it. I love it so much. So there it is. That's my top 10 fantasy of all time. I'm sure no one is shocked by the number 1, but maybe you're shocked about the others. Let me know what you think about my top 10 list and give me your top 10 list. You can especially talk to me more specifically about all this stuff if you join the Discord. Also, of course, we started a Patreon, so if you want to support me and the channel, be sure to check that out. Otherwise, first in, last out.